brought you into this room? Do you think you are worthy to stand next to my son?
I just wanted to show him the things I know.
Veteran saw Maid's daughter, secretly teaching his son what he did. Next, stunned everyone. "Get out of my library before I send you both packing!" The voice of Colonel Walter Harrison thundered through the marble halls of his mansion, shaking dust from the chandelier. Helen, the maid, froze with her mop still dripping. Beside her, 12-year-old Clara clutched her book so tightly the edges cut into her palms. Across the vast oak table sat Ethan, the colonel's only son, eyes wide with dread as his father's rage echoed off the paneled walls. Moments earlier, Clara had been crouched at the table, arranging silver spoons and candlesticks into makeshift armies. Ethan had laughed for the first time in weeks, finally understanding the Revolutionary War as more than dates on a page. It was, as Clara described, a messy family feud that ended in a divorce called independence. For once, his shoulders had lifted, hope flickering in his eyes. But the colonel's sudden arrival shattered the fragile spell. His decorated chest rose and fell under the weight of medals earned decades ago. Yet it was his gaze, cold, calculating, unforgiving, that silenced the room. He had spent his life commanding soldiers and building an empire, and he recognized weakness like a hawk spots prey. To him, Ethan's failures were insubordination. To him, Clara's boldness was trespass. Clara's heart pounded. One misstep, and she and her mother could lose everything: the meager income that kept the hospital bills at bay, the roof over their heads. But behind the colonel's fury, she saw something else: fear. He feared his son's softness, feared losing control, feared that love could succeed where his discipline had failed. The silence after his outburst crackled. Clara's breath caught, Ethan's hands trembled, and the colonel's jaw clenched as if preparing for war. And in that instant, one question hung in the air like a live grenade. What would this battle-hardened millionaire do now that he had discovered a maid's daughter secretly teaching his heir? The Harrison mansion rose like a fortress on the edge of the city, its slate roof cutting sharp lines against the winter sky. Tall iron gates groaned open each morning to let in deliveries, gardeners, and the staff who kept its polished facade gleaming. To outsiders, it was a monument to wealth and power. To Clara, it was a labyrinth she navigated in silence, broom in hand, always one step behind her mother. The air inside smelled of leather and polish. Every room whispered of Walter Harrison's past, a man who had clawed his way from the chaos of the Vietnam War into the cold precision of boardrooms. His study was a museum of discipline, framed maps of battles he had studied at West Point, shelves lined with strategy manuals, medals in glass cases. Even the rug bore military stripes in its pattern. It was a place where laughter felt out of place, where every breath seemed measured. Colonel Harrison himself was the embodiment of order. Tall, broad, with silver hair cropped short and eyes that could pin a man like bayonets, he moved with the authority of one who had commanded soldiers in jungles and executives in skyscrapers. At 60, he was still straight-backed, every gesture efficient. His voice, when it carried through the house, bore the tone of commands, not conversation. He loved his son, perhaps, but loved him in the way a general loves a promising cadet, only when he performed. Ethan Harrison, 12 years old, had grown up in this shadow. He had the posture of a boy who feared disappointing, shoulders slightly hunched as if bracing for reprimand. Tutors came and went, their lessons crammed into long afternoons, mathematics drills, Latin declensions, endless history dates. Ethan tried, but numbers slipped from his grasp and history blurred into meaningless lists. His father's disappointment fell heavier than the textbooks. The threat of Blackwood Military Academy loomed like a guillotine over every failed test. Clara saw Ethan differently. To her, he wasn't the heir to a fortune, nor the boy born into marble halls. He was simply a child with ink-stained fingers and questions too big for the tutor's rote answers. She often caught him sneaking glances at her sketches when she thought no one noticed, his curiosity sharper than his fear. Clara herself was a paradox within those walls. To the Harrisons, she was invisible, the maid's daughter slipping through corridors with a dust cloth, careful never to disturb. But inside, she carried fire. Her father had been a history teacher before illness claimed him, and his bedtime stories had not been fairy tales, but accounts of battles, revolutions, and the thinkers who shaped nations. He had told her that history wasn't about dates, it was about choices, mistakes, and courage. When he died, Clara vowed to carry that light, even if the world only saw her as a shadow. Her mother, Helen, bore the weight of two lives. She scrubbed the colonel's floors by day, then collapsed into their cramped apartment above the garage by night. Bills for her late husband's treatment still arrived, reminders of debts they could never escape. Yet she kept her chin high, telling Clara that dignity was a weapon no hardship could strip away. The gulf between the Harrisons and Helen's family was stark. At dinner, the colonel dined on silver platters under crystal chandeliers. Clara and Helen shared bowls of soup in the flicker of a single lamp. One life smelled of cigars and power, the other of detergent and sacrifice. And yet, their worlds overlapped under the same roof, an empire of marble, guarded by a man of iron, swept clean by those invisible hands. It was in the mansion's library, a cavern of dark wood, where Ethan sat defeated before towers of books, that Clara first crossed the line between servant and teacher. She had paused in her chores, broom in hand, watching him trace the same sentence again and again without comprehension. Compassion outweighed caution. She knelt beside him and with trembling hands rearranged silver spoons into an army, a sugar bowl into a general, a candlestick into a fortress. Suddenly, history lived. Ethan's eyes lit with wonder. For the first time, the past became a story he could touch. And in that spark, Clara felt the pulse of her father's legacy, alive again in the one boy who needed it most. What neither of them knew was that their secret lessons would soon shake the very foundations of the Harrison household and force a battle neither child could have imagined. The change came too quickly for Colonel Harrison to ignore. For months, Ethan had stumbled through his studies, his test papers bleeding red ink, his tutors sighing as they packed their briefcases. Then suddenly, his marks climbed. First a 72, then an 84, and finally a 94 on the dreaded history exam. At dinner, Ethan recited details of the Revolutionary War with a fluency that stunned even his father. But Walter Harrison was not a man who believed in miracles. He knew progress came only through strategy and sacrifice. This improvement smelled of trickery. So he watched. From the shadows of the upstairs landing, he saw Ethan slip into the library late at night. Books spread before him, silver spoons lined like soldiers across the table. Clara hovered beside him, her face intent, her voice low. He couldn't hear her words, but he saw Ethan's laughter, the sparkle in his eyes, the ease with which he repeated her explanations. The colonel's jaw tightened. A maid's daughter trespassing into his son's education, an unsanctioned tutor undermining his authority. His pride prickled like a wound. The next morning, his suspicions sharpened. Ethan, flush with success, boasted to his mother at breakfast about understanding electricity thanks to Clara's potato battery experiment. Walter slammed his hand on the table, silencing the boy. "You will not speak of staff at this table," he barked. "They are here to serve, not to teach. Do you understand?" Ethan's shoulders sagged. His fork clattered against the plate. "Yes, sir." Helen, hovering in the background with a tray, lowered her gaze, shame coloring her cheeks. Clara stood beside her, fists clenched so tightly her nails bit into her palms. The words stung more than a slap. Later, in the hall, the colonel confronted Helen. His voice was low, dangerous, the same tone he once used to dress down subordinates. "Keep your daughter in her place. If I find her meddling with Ethan's studies again, you will both be out by nightfall." Helen bowed her head, murmuring apologies, but Clara saw the tremor in her mother's hands. That night, in their cramped apartment, Helen's voice broke. "Clara, promise me, stay invisible. We cannot risk losing this job. Without it—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. The unpaid hospital bills piled on the dresser spoke loudly enough. Clara nodded, but inside her chest burned. To stay silent meant letting Ethan drown again, crushed beneath the weight of expectations he could never meet. To disobey meant risking everything, her mother's livelihood, their fragile survival. The next evening, Ethan cornered her in the pantry, eyes pleading, "Please, Clara, don't stop. You're the only one who makes it make sense." His voice cracked. "If I fail again, he'll send me away to Blackwood. You don't understand. It's—" He swallowed hard, unable to finish. Clara did understand. She had overheard the colonel's threats. She saw the terror in Ethan's eyes, the same terror she had felt the day the hospital took her father away. She placed her hand over his. "Then we'll keep going, quietly, but you must promise me never tell him it's me. Promise." Ethan nodded fiercely, and so the lessons continued, hidden behind closed doors, whispered over candlelight. But the colonel's suspicion had been roused, and his patience wore thin. He was a man who had survived ambushes in jungles. He knew when a battle was being fought under his nose. The stage was set for a clash not of armies, but of wills between a child soldiering under his father's command, a girl carrying her father's legacy in secret, and a man who mistook control for love. Colonel Walter Harrison had lived his entire adult life by one rule: nothing happens without a cause. A sudden surge in his son's academic ability was no accident. There had to be a source, and sources could be traced. So he did what he had always done on the battlefield. He conducted reconnaissance. At first, it was simple observation. He noted the way Ethan's eyes strayed toward the servants' quarters during lessons. He noticed Clara's quick movements through the halls, her gaze lowered, but her hands always clutching books far too advanced for her age. He even once glimpsed her sketching maps in the dust on a windowsill, with her fingertip lines and arrows that looked eerily like tactical maneuvers. The colonel's instinct screamed, "This child is no ordinary maid's daughter." He began to dig, not through gossip, but through the channels only a man of his standing could access: military archives, alumni registries, whispered phone calls to old comrades who owed him favors. What he found left him sitting in his leather armchair until dawn, the cigar in his hand burned down to ash. Clara was the granddaughter of General Elias Croft. The name alone stirred something inside him. Croft was legend, one of the most brilliant strategists of the 20th century. His theories on asymmetrical warfare were studied at West Point. His campaigns were dissected in military academies around the world. Harrison himself had patterned maneuvers in Vietnam after Croft's principles. And now, here in his house, was a living fragment of that lineage, a girl whose blood carried the instincts of a battlefield genius. It explained everything: her unconventional teaching, her fearless creativity, the way she transformed a history lesson into a war council with nothing more than spoons and candlesticks. She was not imitating knowledge, she was breathing it. The colonel leaned back, staring at the ceiling of his study, the maps and medals around him suddenly feeling hollow. For years, he had tried to mold Ethan into a soldier through brute discipline, through fear and repetition. And yet the boy had come alive under Clara's guidance, not because she enforced, but because she inspired. Still, inspiration was nothing without control. A Croft in his house was both an opportunity and a threat. The next evening, he summoned Clara to his study. The room was heavy with the scent of leather and smoke, walls lined with maps pinned with precise red tacks. She stood at the threshold, her small figure dwarfed by the vastness of the room, but her chin lifted with quiet defiance. "I know who you are," Harrison said at last, his voice low and deliberate. "You've been playing at ghost in my house, but ghosts leave trails. I followed them." Clara's eyes flickered, fear mingled with resolve. "Then you know I never meant harm. I only wanted to help Ethan." The colonel leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Help? You've done more than help. You've done what no tutor, no regiment, no military academy could accomplish. You turned a failing boy into a thinker, into a strategist, into someone who might one day lead." He paused, his gaze sharp. "But you did it in secret, behind my back. That is not bravery, it is insubordination." Clara bit her lip but did not look away. "If I had asked, you would have said no, and Ethan would still believe he's worthless. Sometimes the only way to win a battle is to move unseen." The colonel's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, not quite anger. Spoken like a Croft. He stood and paced to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "I should send you and your mother away tonight, but I won't, because I see an opportunity. Your family may have fallen, but your bloodline has not. I will make you an offer, Clara, a contract, if you will." He turned sharply, eyes glinting. "I will pay your mother's debts. I will triple her salary. I will secure your future schools, opportunities, doors that would otherwise remain locked. In exchange, you will continue to instruct Ethan, but not as a maid's daughter sneaking through corridors. You will be his strategist, his architect. You will shape him into the man I need him to be." Clara's breath caught. The offer was staggering. Safety for her mother, a future for herself. All it required was stepping fully into the role she had already begun to play. Yet the coldness in his tone made it clear he did not see her as a child or even as a teacher. He saw her as a weapon to be wielded, her fists clenched at her sides. "And if I refuse?" Harrison's gaze hardened. "Then you and your mother leave with nothing, and Ethan goes to Blackwood, where he will either learn discipline or be broken by it." The silence stretched long. heavy with smoke and fate. Finally, Clara lifted her chin. "I'll do it, for Ethan and for my mother." The colonel nodded once, decisive, as if sealing a battlefield pact. "Then we understand one another." But as Clara left the study that night, the weight of her choice pressed on her chest. She had won her mother's safety, yes, but she had also stepped into the colonel's war where every kindness was a transaction, every gift a chain. And though she didn't yet know it, the battle for Ethan's soul had only just begun. From that day forward, Clara's role in the Harrison household shifted. No longer just a shadow in the corridors, she entered the library by daylight, seated openly at the table across from Ethan. The colonel's order had given her a strange kind of authority, sanctioned yet fragile, like a ceasefire that could end at the first misstep. Ethan blossomed under her guidance. What tutors had failed to achieve with drills and punishments, Clara unlocked with imagination. She used chess pieces to recreate Napoleon's battles, turning pawns into peasants and queens into monarchs. She showed him how to trace cause and effect like dominoes, not dates. Soon, his notebooks filled with arrows, sketches, and stories. For the first time, Ethan greeted his lessons with eagerness instead of dread. The colonel watched from a distance, arms folded, pride mingled with calculation. To him, Ethan's progress was victory. To Clara, it was rescue. But the deeper Clara waded into this arrangement, the more unease gnawed at her. Ethan was improving, yes, but she began to hear her own words echoed back in tones that sounded eerily like the colonel's. The boy spoke of eliminating weakness instead of building strength, of dominating opponents rather than understanding them. He was becoming sharper, but colder too, molded not just by Clara's lessons, but by the relentless expectations looming over both of them. One evening, after Ethan scored another near-perfect grade, the colonel gathered them in his study. Maps stretched across the walls, the air thick with cigar smoke. He stood behind his desk like a commander debriefing his officers. "Well done," he said curtly to Ethan. "You are finally proving yourself worthy of the Harrison name. And you," his gaze flicked to Clara, "you have fulfilled your end of the contract, a strategist worthy of your bloodline." Clara shifted uncomfortably. "Ethan isn't just fulfilling a name, sir. He's learning to think for himself. He needs encouragement, not just discipline." The colonel's eyes narrowed, the room suddenly taut with tension. "Encouragement is fleeting. Discipline endures. Do not mistake indulgence for strength, girl." Clara's heart pounded. She remembered her father's words that history was not only about generals and wars, but about the people who suffered when leaders forgot compassion. She looked at Ethan, who sat stiffly, waiting for his father's approval like a soldier awaiting orders. And something in her snapped. "Discipline may win battles," Clara said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "but love is what wins people. If all Ethan learns is fear, then one day he will stand beside you in triumph and hate you for it." The words dropped like a stone into silence. Ethan's eyes widened. Helen, lingering at the doorway, covered her mouth. Even the colonel, who had faced gunfire and survived, froze. For the first time in his own house, someone had spoken to him not as a servant, not as a subordinate, but as an equal standing against him. The silence stretched until the colonel's jaw tightened. "You forget yourself," he growled. "You are here because I allow it. Do not mistake my tolerance for weakness." But Clara did not lower her gaze. "And you forget yourself. You're not a commander here. You're a father." The colonel's breath hissed between his teeth. He dismissed Ethan and Helen with a clipped gesture, leaving him and Clara alone in the smoke-laden room. When the door shut, he leaned forward, eyes blazing. "You think courage is speaking out of turn?" he demanded. "No," Clara said softly. "Courage is telling someone the truth, even when it hurts them to hear it." For a long moment, Harrison stared at her, fury wrestling with something he could not name. Then he turned away, his voice rough. "Get out." Clara obeyed, but as she left the study, she knew something irreversible had shifted. She had broken the silence. She had challenged the colonel, not as a servant, but as a soldier on another kind of battlefield. And though his pride burned, the words she had spoken would haunt him like the echo of a gunshot in the dark. For days after Clara's defiance, the mansion felt different. The colonel no longer lingered at the library door during Ethan's lessons. He kept to his study, curtains drawn, smoke curling beneath the door. Ethan sensed the change. His eyes flicked nervously whenever Clara entered, as though afraid his father might suddenly appear and end it all. Then, one evening, the summons came. Clara was called to the study. She stepped inside, the heavy door closing behind her with a thud that sounded like the start of a trial. The room was as it always had been, maps pinned to the walls, medals gleaming in their glass cases, but the man behind the desk seemed more fortress than flesh. "I've made my decision," Colonel Harrison said without preamble. "Ethan will be leaving for Blackwood Preparatory at the end of the term. Your services are no longer required." The words hit Clara like a blow. She had known this moment might come, but the coldness with which he delivered it felt like betrayal, not just of her, but of Ethan. "You can't do that," she said, her voice trembling but unyielding. "You'll break him." The colonel's eyes hardened. "He is my son, not yours." Clara's fists clenched. "Then act like his father, not his commander. You think you're forging him into steel, but you're only turning him into a mirror of your fears. He doesn't need more orders. He needs love." The word hung in the air, dangerous as a live grenade. The colonel rose, slamming his hands against the desk. "Love?" His voice cracked with anger and something else. "Love is weakness. I watched men die in jungles because they hesitated, because they longed for home. Discipline kept me alive. Fear kept men in line. That is what I know. That is what I will give him." Clara stepped forward, eyes blazing. "And what did it cost you? You survived the war, but you lost the people who mattered, and now you're about to lose Ethan, too." Silence, thick, suffocating. For the first time in years, someone had spoken aloud the truth Harrison buried under medals and smoke. The door creaked. Clara turned, and there was Ethan, frozen in the doorway. His face was pale, his eyes wet, but his voice was clear. "She's right." The colonel's chest heaved. "Ethan!" "No!" Ethan cried, stepping inside. "You don't see me. You only see the soldier you want me to be. But I'm not you, Father. I don't want to be you. Clara taught me that learning can be alive, that I can be more than just orders and drills. She sees me. Why can't you?" The colonel faltered, his voice caught in his throat. Ethan's words struck deeper than Clara's blade-sharp truths. He saw his son, shoulders shaking, hands balled into fists, and for the first time he realized the boy wasn't defiant. He was pleading. Harrison sank slowly into his chair, the fight draining from him. His gaze fell to the map spread across his desk, a battlefield frozen in red and blue pins. Once, he had believed every problem could be solved with the right maneuver. But here, in his own home, he was losing the war that mattered most. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "If I lose you, Ethan, then what have I won?" The room was still. Clara watched, breath held, as the colonel covered his face with one hand, shoulders trembling. It was not the collapse of a commander, but the breaking of a father's armor. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "I have asked too much of you, son, and too much of you, Clara." He exhaled, heavy with surrender. The war is over. The decision came swiftly after. Blackwood was abandoned. The contract with Clara dissolved not in anger, but in recognition of something greater. Instead, the colonel announced his intention to sponsor her education. "Not as a servant," he told her quietly, "but as a scholar. You've earned a place where your mind can grow." Ethan rushed forward, throwing its arms around his father for the first time in years. The colonel froze, then slowly wrapped his arms around the boy. Clara turned away, tears stinging her eyes. In that study, beneath the maps and medals, the real victory had been won not of conquest, but of love reclaimed. The next morning, the mansion was quieter than usual. No barked orders from the colonel, no hurried footsteps of staff fearing his temper. Instead, Walter Harrison descended the grand staircase slowly, shoulders no longer squared like a commander, but bent slightly under the weight of realization. In the kitchen, Helen was preparing breakfast, her hands moving quickly over the counter. Clara sat at the table, her school books spread open. They both stiffened when the colonel entered. For years, this room had been one of service, never conversation. But now he paused, almost awkward, clearing his throat. "Helen," he said, his voice lower than usual, stripped of its commanding edge. "Clara." Helen straightened, wary. Clara lifted her chin, expecting another decree. But instead, the colonel did something no one in the house had ever seen. He bowed his head. "I owe you both an apology." The words startled even him. They came haltingly at first, then steadier. "I treated you as tools, not as people. I threatened your livelihood, used your fear against you, and turned Clara's gift into a weapon for my pride. That was wrong." Helen's hands trembled, the knife pausing mid-slice. Clara blinked, almost disbelieving. "I built this house on discipline," the colonel continued, "but discipline without love is a fortress with no soldiers. My son almost became a stranger to me because I could not see past my medals and my pride. And you, Clara," his gaze softened, weary yet sincere, "you had more courage than I ever did. You reminded me what it means to fight for someone, not just against something." The silence stretched. Then Clara spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "You don't win by conquering people, Colonel. You win by caring for them. That's what Ethan needed. That's what you needed too." For the first time, the colonel didn't argue. He simply nodded. Turning to Helen, he said, "From today, you are not just my employee. You are part of this family. Your position here will reflect that not as a maid, but as someone whose dignity I respect." Then to Clara, "And you, young lady, will have a scholarship wherever you choose to study. Not because I pity you, but because you've earned it." Helen covered her mouth, tears brimming. Clara's eyes shone, but she held his gaze, refusing to let gratitude erase the truth of what had passed. At that moment, the balance in the house shifted. The man who had once ruled through fear now stood humbled before those he had overlooked. Power had changed hands not through rebellion, but through truth. In the doorway, Ethan appeared, smiling for the first time without hesitation. He slipped his hand into Clara's, then looked up at his father. "Does this mean we can have breakfast together, all of us?" The colonel swallowed, then managed to smile thin, unpracticed, but real. "Yes, son, all of us." The first breakfast together was a quiet affair at the long mahogany table that once felt more like a tribunal than a family space. The silverware no longer clattered under tension. Instead, Ethan spoke freely about his drawings, his eyes bright, his laughter unguarded. Clara chimed in with her own observations, her words no longer tentative. Helen, usually a silent, joined the conversation, her voice soft but steady. The colonel listened, truly listened. Each word seemed to chip away at the walls he had built around himself for decades. His fork rested on the plate, untouched, as though the simple act of hearing his son laugh mattered more than any meal. When Ethan leaned against his arm, he didn't stiffen this time. He let the boy stay. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion itself seemed to soften. The rigid lines of order gave way to warmth. Maps and medals remained, but they were joined by Ethan's sketches, taped proudly to the walls. The colonel no longer stalked the corridors with commands. Instead, he paced with questions about Clara's studies, about Ethan's dreams, about Helen's well-being. Clara's scholarship was arranged swiftly. One morning, a thick envelope arrived, embossed with the crest of a prestigious academy. Clara held it in her hands, heart hammering. It was her ticket to a future she had never dared to imagine. When she looked up, she found the colonel watching her not as a master overseeing a servant, but as a father figure watching a child step into the world. "You'll do great things," he said, his voice gruff but proud. "Greater than I ever could." Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She glanced at Ethan, who grinned and whispered, "Don't forget me when you're famous." She squeezed his hand. "Never." On the morning of her departure, the entire household gathered by the gate. Helen wept openly, Ethan clung to her waist, and even the colonel, standing stiffly beside them, reached out to carry her books to the waiting car. As he handed them over, his hand lingered. "Clara," he said quietly, "you taught me that battles aren't won with strategy alone. Sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is lay down his armor. Thank you for teaching me to be a father again." Clara smiled, her eyes shining. "And thank you for listening." As the car pulled away, she looked back. Through the window, she saw Ethan waving, Helen's arm around him, and the colonel standing behind them, not as a commander guarding his fortress, but as a man finally at peace with his own surrender. The road stretched ahead, golden under the morning sun. Clara opened the envelope once more, feeling the weight of possibility in her hands. Her future was unwritten, her path uncertain, but she carried with her the proof that even the hardest hearts could change, and that love, quiet, stubborn, relentless, was the greatest victory of all. And in that lingering moment, the story closed not with triumph on a battlefield, but with the promise of something greater, a family rebuilt, a girl's future secured, and a boy's laughter echoing through the halls of a house that had finally become a home.